What's going on, my dear friends? Today in this video, let's learn and master the Angular framework's latest version. So let's get started. Welcome back everyone. I am excited to share this completely updated Angular course designed specifically with beginners in mind. We'll be diving into the fundamentals, exploring the latest Angular features, and building practical projects to solidify your understanding. Alright guys, so in the previous lecture we learned how to deal with the empty value. For this we use the ng4 approach. So in this lecture let's see this in the new approach. So guys, there is not much. Let's do this. So first we have to get the array length. So how do we get that? Same as the previous, in here also we cannot use this count variable. Cause the same reason, if this array is empty, this for loop won't execute. So in here also we have to use the array length approach. So now before this for loop syntax, create an if loop syntax. So how do we do that? Add symbol and the if directive, after this parentheses and the directive scope. Now let's add the condition. So users obj, which is our users array, after this dot length. Next, add the equals operator, which is this two equal signs. Now assign the value, which is number 0. Next, inside the scope, add the message. So create a p tag and the message is the same as the previous, so copy and paste that here. Now after this, add this to this message loaded using syntax. That's all. So save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this loaded the no user data message coming from syntax, right? So we successfully loaded the message when there is no users to fetch. Perfect, right? Before we move on, we have something new, another approach to display this empty value message in this for loop syntax. So this is coming with this new for syntax approach. So we have another new separate block for this, which is empty syntax block. So let's see this in action. It's very easy compared to the previous approach. Just simply open an empty directive block after this for syntax block. Same as other syntax templates. First add the add symbol. After this the directive name empty. For this there is no parentheses. Just simply add the curly brackets. Just simply add the directive scope with curly brackets. Alright, so now this time let's pass the empty array message inside this block. So let's simply copy and paste it from the previous. Change it to loaded from empty syntax block. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this message which is loaded using the new empty syntax block. If I add a new user, as you guys can see here, this removes the message from the DOM and render the new user values. So this empty block also do the same thing but in a different way. So when this for loop trying to execute this loop, if this looping array is empty, this will stop executing this and move on to this empty block and render this value inside the DOM. Something similar like the if else block, right? So this is one of the new features coming with the new Angular syntax approach. So with this empty block, we can simply do this empty message without writing any conditions or logics. Awesome, right? So guys, this is how we deal with the new empty syntax block. Alright guys, so we almost completed all the features in for loop. So in this lecture, we'll quickly go through some of other properties coming with the ng4 and the for loop syntax block. So these are not that much important, but it can be sometimes helpful when you're dealing with the real world application. So let's look at the first and last properties. So guys, simply this will return a boolean value whether the current item is the first or the last item in the list. This can be useful for applying special styles of behavior to the first or last item in a list. So let's see this in action. So guys, I will do this example in the new for loop syntax. So these all valid in the previous ng4 directives as well. So let's look at the first property. So inside this for syntax loop, let's add this first property. Nothing much here, same as the previous index and this count properties. So after this count property, add the semicolon. Let's create a variable for this. Let first assign, the property is $, and the property is first. So guys, in the new syntax approach, always remember all the properties are coming with the $, right? If we want to use this with the ng for all directives, then we don't need to use the $ symbol, right? Alright, so guys, this first property will return true if the current array item is the first one in the list. Otherwise, it will return false. So let's load this inside the browser view so we can see this clearly. So before this, add another string interpolation and add this first variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, in front of all the users, we got these boolean values. For the first value, we got true boolean value and all other values are false. So basically, this is what this first for loop directive will do. So using this boolean value, we can add a dynamic style or we can work on something, conditional rendering and so on. So you guys will get used to this when dealing with real world applications. Alright, so next we have the last property. So guys, this is same opposite of the previous first property. So this will return a boolean value when the current item is the last item in the list. Okay, so let's see this in action. So again, create another variable. After this, the variable this time set as last and assign this to the last property. So this also coming with the $, right? So in order to see this inside the browser view, so let's pass this inside the string interpolation. So inside this previous string interpolation, replace this first to last variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this loaded the boolean value. Unlike previous, this time this returned true boolean value on the last item on the list. If I add another user, as you guys can see here, this changed and this last value only returning a true boolean value. So this is what we can do with the last property. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so let's quickly move on to the next even and odd for loop directive properties. So what is this even and odd properties? So you can find the answer simply with these property names. So these even and odd return a boolean value when the current item is the even or the odd item in the list. If the item is even, this even property will return true, otherwise this will return false. So in other hand, this odd property will return true if the item is odd and otherwise false. Very simple, right? So let's look at this in action so we can understand this clearly. So first, let's look at the even property. So as usual, create a variable, let even. After this, assign this to the $even property. Next, replace the string interpolation value to even, which is this even property variable. Alright, so save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got true boolean value front of these even array indexes. Awesome, right? Alright, so next let's look at the odd property. So after this, again create a variable for this let odd and assign this to the $odd property. Next, replace this even to odd. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. We got this true value front of the odd items. Perfect. So guys, that's it for these properties. These are just simple properties that are bundled with Angular 4 directive. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, this is the end of the ng4 and the new for loop syntax directive. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is our last structural directive, which is ng switch case and the new syntax ng switch. Alright, so guys, in this lecture, let's look at the last structural directive in the list, ng switch case directive. For this also, we have the old ways and the new syntax approach in Angular. So first look at the old way and we'll move on to the new syntax approach. So guys, when we learning if directive, we use this example to load a message inside the view based on the user's role. If the user is admin, we loaded the welcome admin message. If the user is a member, we loaded the welcome member message, and so on. So guys, for this we used the else condition and again another if conditions and so on. So for this, we have an easy and clean approach, which is we can simply do this using the ng switch case directive. So let's see this in action. Before that, I will comment all the previous codes inside the HTML files and inside the TS files as well. So we'll do this from scratch. Next, first thing first, we need a variable to store the user's role. So add that here inside the app component TS file. Set the variable name as user's role and this R is capital. After this, type will be string and set a default value something. Admin, pass this inside quotes. Alright, so next inside the HTML file, let's define the ng switch case directive. Wait, first let's define the HTML code, then we'll work on the directive. So first create a div and inside this add a p tag. Inside this p tag add the message welcome admin. So next copy and paste this p tag again and change the message as welcome member. So guys, when the user is admin, I want to show this admin message. If the user is a member, I want to show this member message. That's it. So guys, now let's work on the logic. When we're dealing with this switch directive, we have to follow two steps. First, we have to define the switch. Then we have to define the cases, right? So, alright. So first we have to define the switch. So let's do this. Inside this div, add this ng switch directive. And guys, we have to define this as a property binding. So wrap this inside of square brackets. Next equal sign. Inside quotes, pass the user role variable. So guys, this is how we define the switch. With this, we are telling Angular to evaluate the user role variable and switch based on its values. So as you guys can see here, we are getting this warning cause as usual, like other ng directives, we have to import this ng switch directive as well. So go to the app component TS file and add this inside this imports array. So the directive is ng switch. Select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. As you guys can see here, this is also coming with the common Angular module. Alright, so next we have to define the case for these messages. So inside this p tag, add this ng switch case. So carefully follow these capital simple letters. So guys, unlike this ng switch, we have to define this as a directive with a asterisk symbol. After this, equal sign and add double quotes. So guys, in here we have to define the case. So we want to show this message when the user role set as admin. So this case is admin. Now we have to pass this as a string value. So inside these double quotes, again add another single quote. Inside this, pass the admin. So guys, this is the case. So simply we are telling Angular to display this message when the user role set as admin. So in here also we are getting this warning. In order to solve this, we have to import this ng switch case directive as well. So go to the app component TS file and add this import statement. This time the directive is ng switch case. Select this autocomplete. That's it. So we successfully completed the two steps. First we define the switch and second we define the cases. With this, we are simply telling Angular to evaluate the user role variable and display the corresponding message based on its value. If the user role is admin, it will show this welcome admin message, right? So save this and go to the browser. In here, we got this welcome admin message. So how this loaded here? Because guys, by default, we set this user role value as admin. So in this case, this ng switch case will return true. So this will display this message. But guys, if you notice this carefully, we got this welcome member also printed here. Why is that? Because guys, we defined this ng switch case only for the first admin message, this p tag. So for this member message, we didn't add any condition logic. So that's why this loaded inside the browser. Even this is inside this ng switch div, right? So in order to fix this, we have to add the ng switch case directive to this p tag as well. So same like previous, asterisk symbol, and the directive is ng switch case. After this, the case is this time we have to show this message when the user role is a member. So pass this inside of quotes. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got only this welcome admin message. So if we change this user role value as member, save this and go to the browser. So this time we got the welcome member message. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, before we move on to the next, what I want to do is I want to add another user role case. Something for user role, something editor. How do you do that? Very simple. Just all we have to do is simply add another case inside this ng switch, right? So down here again create another p tag and set the p tag value as welcome editor. Next we have to define the case same as previous. First add the directive ng switch case followed by the asterisk symbol. Next the case is I want to show this message when the user role set as editor. So pass this inside double quotes and inside of single quotes. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Still we got this member message. Why is that? Because this user role value set as member. So change this to editor. Save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got the editor message. So guys, this is how we deal with the ng switch case directive. So in here, first we have to define the switch. Next we have to define the cases. So inside of a switch, we can add as many as cases we want. So hope you guys got the idea. So guys, before the end of this lecture, let's look at another case for this. So imagine that we are building this logic for our application's login page. If admin logged in, we are showing the welcome admin message. If the member logged in, we are showing this welcome member message, right? So think in any case, if there is no users logged into our application, in other words, this user's role variable doesn't have any value assigned to this. In that case, we want to change the message to something else like please login or something, right? So how do we do that? Can you guys guess? For this guys, we can simply use another ng switch case. Let's see this in action. So first let's make this user's role value as an empty string. Next inside this add another p tag and the message is please login. Now in order to show this conditionally, we have to add the ng switch case directive to this p tag. So add that here. This time the case is just an empty string. So pass that here inside of double quotes and add a single quote and a empty single quotes. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. We got this please login message, which means this working as we expected. But guys, using these empty string values are not a good practice. For this, we have a better approach in Angular. We have another directive for this, which is ng switch default. So using this, we can use this please login message when the user role not defined. So let's see this in action. Just simply remove this ng switch case directive and add the ng switch default directive. So asterisk symbol and the directive is ng switch default. So follow these capital simple letters carefully. So to this directive, we don't need to pass any checking values, right? So guys, we are getting this warning as usual. In order to prevent this, we have to import this directive as well. So go to the app component ES file and add the import statement inside this import array. The directive is ng switch default. Select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this please login message. So guys, how this loaded? When there is no values assigned to the user's role, this ng switch will go through these cases. If there is no any matching case, by default this will load this ng switch default message inside the browser view. So this will not only work with an empty value. So if I set something user role to apart from these switch cases values, in that case also this will print this default message. So let's change this user's role to something HR. Save this and go to the browser. Still we are getting this please login message. So guys, simply we use this ng switch default directive to display a default message when there is no matching cases. So hope you guys got the idea. Awesome. Alright guys, that's the end of the ng switch case directive. So in the next lecture, let's look at the new switch case syntax approach for this. Perfect. Alright guys, in this lecture, let's see how to do the previous examples using the new syntax approach. So let's begin. So guys, same as previous, when using the syntax approach, we have to follow the two steps. First, we have to define the switch. After this, we have to define the cases, the same as previous. So first, let's define the switch. So for this, we have a separate syntax. So let's do this. First, we have to add the @ symbol. And the next, we have to add the directive, which is switch syntax. So after this, add the simple brackets and the directive scope. So simply open and close curly brackets. So same like other directives. So first the @ symbol followed by the directive name. After that, we have to add the brackets and the directive scope. So all the new directive syntax are same like this, right? Alright, so now inside the brackets, we have to define the switch. In our case, switch is this user's role variable. So pass that inside this switch directive brackets. That's it. So guys, successfully we completed our first step. Next, let's move on to the second step, which is defining cases for this switch. So guys, for this also we have a separate cases syntax. So let's add this inside this switch scope, @ symbol, and the directive is case. So after this, parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this parentheses, pass the case. So our first case is that we want to show the admin message when this user role switch set as admin. So set our first case as admin inside this case brackets. So pass this as a string value inside quotes. So next, inside this scope, let's add the message that we want to render inside the browser. So create a p tag and the message is welcome admin. So guys, we successfully completed the second step as well. So now let's see whether this is working or not. Save this. Wait before we move on. Change this user's role value back to admin. So save all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this welcome admin message, which is coming from this case syntax. So guys, this is also same like the ng switch case directive. The only different here is these syntaxes, right? Alright, so now if you want to show the second case for the member message, how do we define that using this case syntax block? Can you guys guess? Yes, of course. So in the previous ng switch case, we created another switch case in the same ng switch scope, right? So this is also same like that. Just simply create another case block inside this switch block. After this first case, add another case syntax, at symbol, and the directive is case. So after these brackets and the directive scope. Now the case is, we want to execute this case when user's role set as member. So pass that here as a string value inside quotes. Alright, so next inside this pass the message, create a p tag, and the message is welcome member. That's it, we successfully defined the second case. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we still got this admin message. Why is that? Because this value set as admin. So change it to member. Again save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got the welcome member message, which means second case also working as we expected. Alright guys, before end of this lecture, let's look at the default switch case as well. So in this new syntax, we have a separate syntax for this default switch case. So same like previous, if you want to show a message when the user is not logged in or when our user's role variable value is set as empty string value. So how do we do that? For this, we use the ng switch default directive in the previous approach. So in this syntax also, we have a separate syntax for this called default. So let's see this in action. Down here, after the second case block, add this at symbol and the directive is default. Next for this, we don't need any parentheses because for this default case, we no need to pass any condition cases, right? So just simply add the directive scope. So next let's pass the message inside the scope, add the p tag, and set the message as please login. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. We got the welcome member message. So why is that? Because this user role set as member. Now change this to an empty string. Save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got our default message, please login. So this default syntax block also working as we expected. Awesome, right? So guys, this is also same like the previous switch case. First we have to define the switch, and after that we have to define the cases. So in any case, if we want to show a default message, then we can use this default syntax block, right? So guys, that's it for this lecture. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, this is the end of the structural directive. So next, let's move on to the attribute directive. Perfect. Alright guys, we successfully completed the Angular structural directive. So now from on this lecture and next few lectures, let's dive into the attribute directives. So under this attribute directive, first let's look at the ng style directive. So guys, I created here an h1 tag and added these text as h1 text welcome admin. So guys, inside the browser, this is loaded with the default styles. Now what I want to do is, I want to set this h1 text color green and all uppercase based on a condition. Think we have a boolean variable called is logged in. If this is logged in value set to true, I want to make this h1 text color in green. And also I want to make all the text uppercase. If the boolean value is false, I want to make this red lowercase letters. So how do we do that? For this, we can use this style binding approach, right? So in the data binding section, we learned about this. So let's see this in action. So guys, how do we do this style binding? First thing first, inside these open and close square brackets, as you guys know, we use the square brackets for property binding in Angular, right? So now inside this, the binding is style. After this, we have to pass the CSS property name. So first I want to change the color of the text. So the CSS property is color. Next, we have to define the logic or the condition. For this, pass the variable which is logged in. So pass this inside of double quotes. So after this, question mark. If this return true, set the green color. So pass this inside single quotes. Otherwise, set this color to red. So we define the else part using the colon, right? So don't forget to pass the red color also inside of single quotes. Awesome, we successfully set the first style. Now next I want to add another style, which is I want to set this text to uppercase. So how do we do that? For this again, we have to add another style binding, right? So I copy and paste this previous style binding, change the CSS property. So this time we have to pass the CSS property text transform. So pass that here. So guys, pass this as HTML DOM style properties. So as a single word with the second word first letter capital. In our case, this transform T is capital. So guys, hope you all remember this. We learned about this in detail, right? So next we have to change the values. If this true, I want to set uppercase. So pass that here inside this quote. In the else, pass the lowercase style value. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this green uppercase heading text in the browser. So if I change this boolean value to false, now we got this red lowercase letters, which means everything working as we planned. So guys, if we look at this in here, we wrote two style bindings for this single HTML element. For a single style binding, this approach is okay, but for multiple style binding, this is not a good practice. So as a solution for this, Angular has given us the ng style directive. So using this, we can simply write these two style bindings inside of a single ng style. So let's see this in action. So guys, down here again, I'll create another h1 text for this. So you guys clearly see this difference between these two approaches. So h1 tag and set the text as ng style directive. So next let's add the ng style to this. So guys, the condition is same like previous. If this is logged in value set as true, this text must be in green uppercase letters, otherwise red lowercase letters. So how do we do this? Very simple, same like previous. Inside square brackets, pass the directive name ng style. After this, we have to pass the conditions and the styles that we want to apply. So guys, in this ng style, we have to pass the values inside of an object. So simply open and close curly brackets. So inside this, first we have to pass the CSS property. So first I want to set the color. So the CSS property is color. Pass this inside of quotes, right? Next, add a semicolon and pass the logic, which is the is logged in variable. So pass that here. Next, we have to pass the CSS values. So if this true, question mark, set the green color. So pass this also inside single quotes. After this, if this return false, we define that using the semicolon, right? Add the semicolon, set the color to red. So pass this also inside quotes. That's it. So we successfully defined the first style. Next, let's see how we can add the second style for this. Guys, how do we do that? Do we have to add another ng style to this? Now guys, unlike the style binding, here we can stack multiple styles to this single ng style directive. So let's see this in action. I'll break this into the next line so we can see this clearly. So after the first style, add a comma, and in the next line, simply just add the second style and the condition. So again, the second style property is text transform, pass this inside quotes. So after this condition, which is this is logged in variable, pass this after the colon symbol. So next the values, so question mark, if this true, set the text to uppercase. If this false, set the value to lowercase. That's it. So guys, we are getting this error because in order to work with this ng style directive with this component, we have to import this. So same like the other ng directives like previous, right? So go to the app component ts file and add the directive inside the imports array ng style and select this autocomplete. Alright, so save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got our second heading text in red color lowercase letters. So why is that? Because this is logged in value now set as false. So change it to true. Save this and go to the browser. Now you guys can see here, this time we got this text in uppercase green color text. So guys, which means this ng style also working as we expected. Alright guys, so the beauty of this ng style is with the single binding we can bind styles to our HTML element as many as we wanted, unlike the previous style binding. In the style binding approach, for the each and every style bind we have to write separate style bindings, but with this ng style directive we can simply write this all inside of one single ng style directive. Awesome, right? Alright guys, so this is how we use the ng style directive in our Angular application. Alright guys, in this lecture let's see the second attribute directive, which is ng class directive. This is the alternative for class binding. Nothing much here. So let's see this in action. So guys, think rather than binding these two styles one by one, we can create CSS class for this and we can add these two styles inside of that CSS class, right? So something like this. Go to the app component CSS file and let's create a CSS class something login, and inside this add our CSS styles. First one is the color, set this to green, and next is the text transformation. For this, set the value as uppercase. So let's first see the class binding approach. So then we'll come back to the ng class directive. Alright, so how do we do the class binding? Hope you guys all remember the class binding, right? Alright, so let's do this. Inside the HTML file, let's create another h1 tag for this and set the text to something class binding. Next, let's add the class binding approach to this h1 tag. So inside this h1 tag, open in tags, inside add square brackets. So the binding is class. After this, we have to pass the CSS class name, which is this login. So add this after this class dot login. Next, inside quotes, pass the is logged in variable. So guys, if this is logged in value return true, this will apply this CSS class to this. Otherwise, this will remove this CSS class from this h1 tag. Alright, so save this and go to the browser. We got these green uppercase letters because this is logged in value is now true. So now what I want to do is I want to change this heading to red color lowercase text to when this is logged in value set as false. So how do we do that? For this, first thing first, we need the CSS class. So let's define this. Inside the app component CSS file, duplicate this previous entire CSS class and change the class name to something logout. Next, change the color to red and at last change the text transform to lowercase. That's it. So next, in order to add the second class, we have to use another class binding, right? So I just copy and paste this previous class binding again and change the class name to logout. Next, I want to show this when the is logged in value set as false. So add the not operator here, which is this exclamation mark, right? Next, quickly set this boolean value to false. Save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, now this h1 text are in red and lowercase. So guys, this is how we bind two classes in class binding approach. So next, let's see how do we do this using the ng class directive. So guys, in order to use this ng class directive, we have to first import this to our component. So first, let's add the import statement. So inside the import array, add the ng class and select the autocomplete. Next, inside the component HTML file, and let's create another heading tags for this. Create h1 tags and set the text as ng class directive. Next, let's add the ng class directive to this h1 tags. How do we do that? Very simple, same like the ng style binding. So instead of square brackets, pass the directive ng class. Next, inside quotes, open and close object scope, which is curly brackets. Now inside this, first we have to pass the CSS class name and the condition like object key value pairs. So inside quotes, add the CSS class that we want to add to this text, which is login CSS class, right? So after this, colon, and the condition is this variable is logged in. So guys, if this is logged in value return true, this will apply this CSS class to this h1 tag. Alright, so let's look at the second scenario. If this is logged in value set to false, I want to add this logout CSS class to this heading tag. So how do we do this using the ng class directive? So unlike the class binding, for this we don't need to use another ng class directive. So we can simply pass that CSS class also inside this same ng class directive. So after this, add a comma. Next, same like previous, first pass the class, which is logout. So don't forget to pass this inside quotes. So next, pass the condition. This time we need to check the false condition. So let's add the is logged in variable with the not operator or with the exclamation mark. That's it. So guys, simply this will apply this logout CSS class to this heading tag if this variable return false boolean value, right? That's it. Save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, now we got this ng class text in red lowercase. Why is that? Because now this variable value set as false. So now let's change this to true. Save this all and go to the browser. Now as you guys can see here, this time this text changed to green uppercase letters. So which means this ng class directive applied the CSS class according to our condition. So guys, this is the simple use case of ng class directive. So when we working on the project, you guys will understand these concepts with more in-depth examples. Alright, so guys, that's it for this lecture. Let's move on to the next lecture.
Alright, now you guys have an idea about Angular directive. In the first lecture of this section, if you can remember, I said that we have 4 main directive types in Angular. The first one is component directive, which is the Angular component. The second one is structural directive. Third one is attribute directive. And the last one is custom directive. So in this section, let's look at what is structural and attribute directive. The first, what are the structural directives? Structural directives are responsible for the HTML layout. This structural directive shape or reshape the DOM's structure, typically by adding, removing or manipulating the DOM elements. Structural directives are easy to recognize with the leading asterisk symbol. So we learned several directives in this section. So we have few directives with the leading asterisk or the star symbol, which are ng-for, ng-if and the ng-switch cases. So these are the structural directive. Let's look at some examples. I have created just a few examples for this. The first one, the ng-if directive. So what is happening here? With this ng-if directive, we're showing this div when this statement is true. So this will add this div to the DOM when this is true. If this is not true, this will remove this div and this will add this ng template inside the DOM. So with this ng-if directive, we are manipulating the DOM's structure by adding and removing elements to the DOM. So this is why we called this ng-if directive as a structural directive. If you look at the second directive, ng-for, this also adds this list element to the DOM by fetching an array. If there is a data inside the array, this will add list elements to the DOM. If there is no data, this will remove the list element from the DOM. The switch case also the same. If this condition is true, this will add this to the DOM. If this statement is false, this will remove this from the DOM. So this is what we called structural directive. So here is the lesson. With this structural directive, we can manipulate the DOM by adding and removing DOM elements dynamically. So for a structural directive, we use this leading asterisk symbol. So we can easily identify a structural directive with this leading asterisk. So let's look at the attribute directive. So what is attribute directive? An attribute directive changes the appearance or behavior of a DOM element. We can name ng-style and ng-class directives as attribute directives. You guys already knew, with these attributes, we applied styles to an element conditionally. If the statement is true, this will add this style to the DOM. If the statement is false, this will remove the styles from the DOM. So simply, this is what we can do with attribute directives. We use these attribute directives as like property binding inside of a square brackets. We are not adding any leading asterisks because this is not a structural directive. So here is the lesson. With this structural directive, we can manipulate the DOM by adding and removing elements to the DOM's structure. But with the attribute directive, we can only change the appearance of a DOM element. We cannot manipulate the DOM using these attribute directives. So hope you guys got the idea.
Alright, so in this section, let's get started with the component relationship. So guys, the first question is, what is this relationship in components? As you guys know, in the component section, we learned about components. And if we recap that, basically component is the main building block of an Angular application. So mainly we use this component to structure a website. Hope you guys remember this. Now let's look at what is this relationship in these components. Well guys, when we are building an Angular application, we are not just put all the components inside of a main component, right? So we are carefully organizing them in a structured way. And that's where component relationship come into play. Think about it like a family tree. In a family, you have parents, children, and siblings. So they are all related to each other in different ways, right? So similarly, in an Angular application, components can have relationship with each other components. So they can be parent components, child components, or sibling components. So as I said earlier, in Angular, we have 3 component relationships. So let's look at them one by one. So the first one is parent-child relationship. So guys, this is the most common type of component relationship in Angular. In this relationship, a component the parent includes another component, the child, in its template. For example, in a blog application, blog post list component might include multiple instances of the blog post component. The parent component can pass data to the child component via input properties, and the child component can send data back to the parent via output properties. So next is the sibling relationship. So in this relationship, two components share the same parent, so they can communicate with each other indirectly via the parent component or directly via the shared service. So next we have the nested relationship. So this is when you have multiple levels of parent and child components. For example, in a blog application, you might have a main component that includes a blog post list component, which in turn includes multiple blog post components. So guys, that's the basic idea of component relationship in Angular. It's all about how components are connected and interact with each other. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into each of these component relationships, exploring how data flows between components and how to manage state in Angular application. Alright guys, so in this lecture, let's learn about parent-child relationship data flow in Angular components. So in this lecture, let's dive deeper into how we can use this relationship to pass data between components. Alright, so let's see what is this parent-child relationship first, then we'll dive into how to manage data between these components. So guys, in the previous section, we created these two header and the navbar components. So in order to load this inside the browser, we have to add these components inside our main root component, right? So how do we add that here inside the app component? For this, we can simply use the component selector, right? So let's add them here. So the header component selector is app-header. So how do I know this? Simply you can check this inside the header component TS file under this selector property, right? So guys, all of these fundamentals we learned in detail in the component section. So any of you guys can't remember these, so please go back to the component section and go through the lessons again and come back to this section. Alright, so let's add the header component selector inside the app component HTML file and add this as a custom HTML tag, right? So next let's add the navbar. So the navbar component selector is app-navbar. So add this also after this as a custom HTML tag. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, the content of these two components are loaded inside the browser. So guys, let's look at the relationship between these components. In Angular, when we nest component inside one another, the outer component is called the parent component and the inner component is called the child component. So in our case, the app component is the outer or the parent component, and these two header and the navbar components are the inner components or the child components. So just think like a pregnant mother carrying her baby inside her belly. So the mother is outside and the baby is inside, right? So, but guys, one more thing, if I remove this header component select from this app component, so this header component will no longer will be a child component of the app component. So in order to maintain the relationship, we have to maintain the connection. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now hope you guys have a clear picture of what is this relationship, parent-child relationship in the component. So next let's look at our main course, data flow between parent to child component. So what is the parent-child relationship data flow? Well guys, in a parent-child relationship, the parent component can pass data to the child component and the child component can also pass data back to the parent component. Yeah, it's like a two-way communication. So guys, but why is this important? Well, the basic concept of any application is the data flow.
we have to pass or manipulate the data inside of our whole application, right? So in our case, in Angular, we need to pass data from one component to another component, and that's where the parent-child relationship comes in. So let's see this in action. Guys, for this example, I will instruct you guys from scratch. So by generating the new component for this, so you guys can understand this better. So guys, for this, imagine we have a app component that contains a post list component. So in this case, app component is the parent and the post list component is the child. So now let's say we want to pass a post title from the app component to post list component. So how do we do that? Let's see this in action. So guys, first let's generate a new component for this. So guys, how do we generate a new component? Yes, of course, it's very simple. We can simply generate a component using the Angular CLI command, right? So go to the VS Code integrated terminal and inside this, type this command. ng gc, and the component name is, let's name this post-list. So I hope you guys remember this command. This ng is the Angular CLI command. This G stand for generate and this C stand for command. So with this command, we are telling to Angular CLI to generate a new Angular component and name it this name post list, right? So in order to execute this command, hit enter. As you guys can see here, this generated all the component files, HTML, CSS and the TS file. So all located inside of this new folder, post list. Cool, right? So next what I want to do is I want to load this component inside the browser. So how do we do that? Yes, of course, in order to load a component inside the browser, we have to add the component selector to our main root component, which is this app component. So let's do this. Go to the app component HTML file. Inside this, let's add the post list component selector, which can be found inside the post list component TS file under this selector property, right? So inside the component HTML file, add the selector app-post-list, and this as a custom HTML tag. Now as you guys can see here, we are getting this error. Why is that? Yes, of course, in order to connect these two components, we have to import that components to this app component. So this is the standalone component feature, right? We learned all about this when we learning Angular components, right? Any of you guys cannot remember this, go back to the component section and learn this again. Okay. I think that's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this loaded this text post list works, which is coming from this post list component HTML file, which means we successfully loaded the post list component inside the browser. So now let's get into the real business. So now I want to pass a value from this app component to this post list component. Think if we have the post title stored inside of a variable inside this app component, and we want to load that title inside the post list component. So how do we do that? In this case, we can take the advantage of the parent-child component relationship and we can share the data between these components, right? So guys, can you tell me which component is the parent and which one is the child? Guys, in here, app component is the parent and the post list component is the child. Why is that? Because the post list component is inside this app component, right? So this app component is the main component and this post list component is load inside this app component, right? So in this case, so this app component is the main root component or the parent component and this is the child component. So hope you guys got the idea. Now let's create a variable inside the app component to store the post title. So go to the app component TS file and create a variable inside this class scope. The variable name is post title and the type is string.
After this, assign a default value something post 1. Next, what I want to do is I want to show this post title inside the post list component. So guys, before that, can you guys tell me how do I load this post title inside the browser view using this app component HTML file? How do we do that? Very simple guys, we learned about this in a previous section. We can use one of the data binding approaches. For this, we can simply use the string interpolation approach. So let's see that. It's very simple. Inside the component, let's add an h1 tag and let's pass the username inside this h1 tag. So string interpolation, it's 2 curly brackets. Inside this, pass the post title variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we can see this post title value loaded inside the browser. So guys, now let's load this post title variable inside the post list component or the child component. So how do we do that? So guys, for this, we just simply use the string interpolation and load this post title inside the post list component like this. No, we can't, right? As you guys know, this variable is declared inside the app component file, but the post list component is a separate file. So we cannot access this variable directly from the post list component, right? So guys, for this we have to follow some steps and techniques in order to access this variable from this post list component. So let's see this in action. So as the first step, we have to pass this app component's post title variable to this post list component. So we connect, or this parent child bond is created with this component selector, right? So if I remove this, there is no connection or relationship between these components. So in order to pass the app component's post title to this post list component, we can simply use this component selector, right? So guys, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna bind the post title to this post list component selector. So let's do this. As you guys know, in order to bind a data to an HTML selector, we use square brackets, right? So same like that, in here also create a pair of square brackets. Inside this, set a new variable name, which is something post title. Next, we have to pass the post title variable, which carries the title of the post inside the app component file. Wait, this is a little confusing. If we use the same variable name for these both, right? So let's make this app component variable name post title to app post title. Now change this string interpolation and also change this binding variable to app post title. So now change this post title inside the square brackets to post list title. So now we can easily identify both variables, right? Alright, so we successfully send the app post title to the post list title. But wait guys, here we are getting an error saying that this post list title is not a known property of post list component. So what is the problem here? Can you guys guess? Guys, this is not something a big error. Here we added the post list title variable to capture this app post title value. But inside of the post list component, still we don't have this variable. That's why we are getting this error. For this, we have to capture this inside the post list component. So guys, how do we do that? For this, first thing first, we have to define this variable inside the post list component. So guys, go to the post list component TS file and create this variable post list title. Set this type as string and set an empty default value. So now we have the variable, but still we are getting this same error inside the app component HTML file. So now what is the problem? Yes, of course, you are right. We defined the variable, but we still need to tell Angular that this variable is an input property which receives data from its parent component. For this, we have a special type of syntax in Angular, which is the input decorator. So using this, we can let the Angular compiler know this post list title variable is an input type variable which can receive data from its own parent component. So let's see this in action. Let's add the input decorator before this post list title variable in the post list component is file. So something like this. So guys, this is an Angular decorator type, so we have to use @ symbol first. So after this, we have to pass the decorator name, input, I is capital. Next, we have to set the parentheses. So now we are getting this error. To solve this, so select this first one from this autocomplete, so which will add this input statement. So this input decorator is coming from the Angular core package. That's it. So save this and now let's go back to the app component HTML file and see if we can pass this app post title value to this post list title variable. Yeah, it should work now because now we cannot see our previous error. Awesome. So guys, once again, by adding the input decorator, we are telling Angular that this post list title variable is an input property that can receive data from its parent component. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so next, in order to load this inside the browser, we have to load this inside the HTML file. So go to the post list component HTML file and first create an h2 tag and load the post list title variable inside this h2 tags using this string interpolation. So open and close two curly brackets and inside this pass the post list title variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this second post title printed here, which is coming from the post list component. Wait, let's add an identifier to this so we can see the difference here. So after this post list title, add post list. Now inside the app component HTML file, add app after this string interpolation. So now save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, the both post titles are printed here, which means we successfully sent this app post title to the post list components. So guys, this is how we share data from parent component to children component. Alright, so before we start this lecture, let's do another example. Think that I want to send another data to post list component from this app component. How do we do that? So first let's create a variable for this. So the variable is something. This time let's send a boolean value. So the variable name something, app is login. Set the type to boolean and set a default value something false. Wait, before we move on, guys, you guys try to do this your own. Send this variable value to the post list component, right? So pause this video and try to do it yourself. Once you are done, come back and continue this lecture. Alright, so let's back to the work. Hope you guys did the task well. So let's do this. First thing first, we have to send this variable to the post list component. So go to the app component HTML file and inside this post list component selector. Now again, we have to send another variable to this. So how do we do that? Simply we can bind another variable to this selector tags like the previous post title. So same like this. So let's do this. Inside this, open and close square brackets. So inside this, create a variable which is going to receive our variable inside the post list component. So create a variable something, post is login. So now after this, we have to bind this to our app is login variable. So pass this inside quotes. Simple, right? So like this, guys, we can stack multiple data binding to this component selector. Alright, so now we have successfully sent the app is login variable to the post list component. But wait, we are not done yet. We are getting this error. Why is that? Because we still need to capture this variable in the post list component. So let's go to the post list component is file and create this post is login variable to capture this value. So same like previous, we have to create this variable with the input decorator. So symbol and the input. After this, add the parentheses and the variable name post is login, and set this type to boolean, and finally set a default value something false. So now this error is gone. In order to check whether this is working or not, so let's load this inside the view. So go to the post list component HTML file and create another p tag and load this post is login variable using string interpolation. Now save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this printed this login value false. Perfect. So now we have successfully captured the is login variable in the post list component. So now hope you guys clearly understand how to send the data from parent to child component. Alright, so now let's dive into actually how this data flow works. What is this binding does and what is this input decorator does for this parent-child data flow. So let's take a simple real-world example to understand this better. Imagine you are trying to send a package from one city to another, but there is a big wall in between that blocks the package from reaching its destination. In this scenario, the package is like the data we want to send from the parent component to the child component, and the wall is like the barrier that prevents the data from flowing between the two components. To overcome this barrier, we need to create a bridge that allows the package to pass through, and that's exactly what the input decorator does. So it's create a bridge between the parent and child components, allowing the data to flow from the parent to child. Wait, let's see another way to explain this. So guys, in the parent component, which is this app component, we have a package, which is this variable app post title that we want to send to the child component, which is this post list component. So we are sending that package using this bind. Think this binding is like a delivery bus, and we put our data inside this bus and sending it to the child or the post list component. But guys, we have a problem, which is this child component is like a locked box that can only receive packages through a specific door. So in order to open that door, we need a key. So that's where the input decorator comes in. So we need to add the input decorator in the child component to unlock it and allow the package to pass through. So this simply opens the door to receive the data that comes from the parent component. Simple, right? So this is what's happening behind the scenes when we passing data from parent component to child component. Alright, so we have learned how to pass data from parent component to child component using the input decorator. So we have also seen how to bind multiple variables from the parent component to the child component. So once again, guys, the input decorator is used to create a bridge between the parent and child component, allowing data to flow from the parent to the child. And the binding syntax is used to attach the data to the input property of the child component, allowing it to receive the data and use it to render its content. In other words, we use input decorator to create a channel for data to flow from the parent component to the child component. This is a fundamental concept for this input decorator that I can give. Alright, so hope you guys got the fundamental idea about how to share data between parent to child component. Now let's move on to the next topic. Alright guys, in the previous lecture we learned about how to send data from the parent component to the child component. So guys, now in this lecture we are going to talk about how a child component can send information back to its parent component in Angular. This is super useful when you guys want to component to talk to each other. Alright, so let's dive into how to pass data from child component to the parent component. For this guys, we can't use the input decorator here because we don't have the parent component selector inside the child component, right? So because of that, we can't use the input decorator method to pass the data in the child component to the parent component. So in order to use this input decorator method, always there should be an input element. Otherwise, we can't use this, right? So in the previous lecture, we passed data to the child component by binding it to the component selector. So hope you guys remember this. Alright, so guys, now what I want to do is I want to pass a message from the post list component to the app component. In other words, from this child component to the parent component. So how do we do that? Guys, for this we have two methods in Angular. So the first one is using the view child decorator and the second one is using the output decorator and the event emitter. So in this lecture we'll look at the first method using view child. We'll cover the second method in the next lecture. Alright, so let's see this data flow from child to parent using the view child in action. So this time we want to share data from the child to the parent component. So create a variable inside the child component, which is the post list component. So inside the post list component, create a variable called child message. And this variable type will be string. After this, set some text as the value for this variable, like hello from child component. Alright, so now we have the variable. Now let's access this variable from the parent app component. For that, as I said, we will use the view child decorator. So guys, simply this view child will look inside the child component and let us access the variable stored inside the child component from the parent component. So let's do this. Open the app component ES file, and first thing first, let's add the import statement. So top here, add this. So guys, this view child also coming from this Angular core module. So put this inside the same import section. So simply add the view child module inside these curly brackets. After this, add a comma and add the module view child. Carefully follow these capital simple letters. This first V and the C letters must be capital. So next, inside the component class scope, let's add the view child decorator to look inside the child component. So add view child decorator. So how do we add that? Same as the input decorator, we have to add this with the @ symbol. So after this, so add a @ symbol, and after this, view child decorator. So once again, carefully follow these capital simple letters. So after this, add the parentheses, open and close simple brackets. So guys, next, this view child required a parameter. So inside this parentheses, we have to pass the child component that we want to get the data from. So right now we want to get the data from the post list component, which is the child component. Okay, so put this post list component inside the view child parentheses. So next we have to give it a name. This can be any name. So let's call it child message and set this type as any. That's it. So alright guys, so now we have captured the post list component child components using this view child decorator. Next, we need to access the child component and get that variable message to parent, which carrying our message that we want to load inside the parent component. So first thing first, let's log and see what's coming from this view child. So let's log this inside the constructor now. So create a constructor here. How do we create a constructor method? Very simple, just simply add the keyword constructor and after this parentheses and the constructor method scope. So now inside this constructor block, log the view child property and see what we get. So add this console.log inside parentheses, pass this variable child message. So actually this view child will access this child component and store the child component's instance inside this variable. So simply just log this child message variable. So inside this parenthesis, pass the variable name this dot child message. Perfect. So now save this all and go to the browser. Inside the browser console, as you guys can see here, we got undefined here. So what is this and why we get this undefined? What's going on here? Can you guys guess? Before we continue this lecture, quickly let's recap what we did. We used the viewChild decorator to access a child component's data from the parent component. So we tried to log the child component's data inside the constructor of the parent component. But when we checked the browser console, we saw undefined, which means this log returning this undefined. So what's going on here? So guys, when the constructor of the parent component is called, the child component hasn't been fully created yet. That's why when we try to log the child message variable inside the constructor, it shows undefined in the browser console. So in simple terms, the child component isn't ready at that moment. So in other words, at the time the app component is created, the postlist component is undefined. That's why we are getting undefined printed inside the browser console. So guys, in order to fix this and access this child message, we need to wait until the child component is fully initialized inside the browser. For this, Angular provides a special lifecycle hook called ngAfterWaveInit. So this hook runs after Angular has fully initialized the component's weave and its child waves inside the browser. Guys, wait. I know you guys may wonder what is this lifecycle hook and these methods. So don't worry about this, we have a complete section for these lifecycle hooks. Just go through these steps only to complete this lecture. Alright, so let's do this. So go to the app component is file. First we need to import AfterWaveInit from Angular core. So top here, add this hook name inside this same Angular core import. So the hook name is AfterWaveInit. Once again guys, carefully follow these capital symbol letters. Alright, next we need to implement this AfterWaveInit lifecycle hook in this app component class. So then only we can use this lifecycle hook inside this app component. Otherwise this will throw an error. So after this app component class, add this implements keyword and the hook AfterWaveInit. So once again follow these capital simple letters carefully, otherwise this code can be break. Next let's create the lifecycle method, same like this constructor method. So inside this app component class scope, create this method. The method name is ngAfterWaveInit. This name must be same as this, so carefully follow this naming convention. So after this, add the parentheses and the method scope. Now guys, inside this method, log the viewChild property again. So create a console log and inside this pass this variable child message. That's it. So now save this and go to the browser. Reload the page and open the browser console. Now as you guys can see here, we have this undefined and this object printed inside the browser console. So guys, this undefined is coming from the constructor method and this child component object is coming from the AfterWaveInit lifecycle hook. Which means guys that our child component is now fully initialized and we can access its data using the viewChild. So once again, the constructor method runs too early before the child component is not ready and loaded inside the browser. So that's why we are getting this undefined. So this ngAfterWaveInit runs after the parent view and the child views are fully initialized. So at this moment, the child component is ready and we can access its data. So that's how we got this object printed inside the browser. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now let's look at this log. As you guys can see here, viewChild method captured and returned this object. So the object name is postlist component, which is our child component. If I expand this, inside this we get our parent variable and its message, which we created inside the postlist component. So now we got this inside our parent app component. Wait, let's create another variable inside the postlist component, something post count. So set this type to number and set a default value 0. So save this and go to the browser. So now if you look at this object further, we can see the post count variable too. So guys, this is the beauty of view child. So with this view child decorator, we can access all the postlist components variable from the parent app component. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now we have the data, but let's show this inside the browser. So how do we do that? For this we can use same like previous string interpolation approach, right? So inside the app component HTML file, create a p tag, and inside this add the string interpolation. Inside this add the view child variable, which is the child message. So guys, this is an object. In order to show the child message, we have to pass that object key name here. So which is this variable name. So pass this after this dot. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. We got nothing here. Why is that? Inside the browser console, we got this undefined error. So what's going on here again? Can you guys tell me? Yes, of course. So guys, if you remember, when we logged the view child value using the constructor method, we got the same undefined problem. The same reason is causing the string interpolation undefined error as well. The problem here is the same as before. The child component isn't ready when the constructor runs. So when we try to use child message in string interpolation, it's still undefined because the view child hasn't been initialized yet. So in order to fix this, we need to make sure that the child component is fully initialized before we use its data in the parent component. We already know that ng after view init is the right place to handle this because it runs after the view including the child components has been fully initialized. So we learned about this, right? So instead of trying to use child message directly in the string interpolation, we should assign it to a variable in the parent component after the view has been initialized. So in the ng after view init method, we can set this variable and then use this new variable in the string interpolation. So let's see this in action. Create a variable something message inside the app component is file, class scope. Set this type as a string and assign an empty string value. So inside the lifecycle method, assign this view child message value to this new variable. So inside this dot message equal sign. So after this view child variable, so this dot child message. So after this, the variable name of the message variable that we declared inside the child component, which is this. So pass that here after this dot. So now inside the string interpolation, simply pass this message variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Beautiful, right? So we got this message from the child component, which is coming from the post list component. So guys, this is how we pass data from the child component to the parent component using the view child decorator. So once again guys, don't worry about the lifecycle method. We will dive deeper into this in a later section. So just get an idea about how to share data from child component to a parent component using the view child decorator. Perfect. Alright, in the last video we learned how to pass data between a child component and a parent component using the view child decorator. Now let's look at how to pass data from a child component to a parent component using the second method, the output decorator and the event emitter. So guys, this approach is useful when you want to see data changes that occur on things like button clicks or user interactions. So think that I want to send a message to the parent component when click the send message button on the child component. So how do we do that? Well, let's see this in action. So first, for this also, let's create a new variable inside the child component, which is the postlist component. So inside the postlist component, create a variable called something parent message. And this variable type will be a string. Next, set the value to something like message from the child component using click event. Now let's create a button inside the postlist component template, because I want to send this message to parent component when click a button, right? So go to the postlist component HTML file and create a simple button. The button text will be send message to parent. Next, inside the button tags, add a click event. In Angular, we use parentheses for events, right? So inside the parentheses, the event is click. Next, from here, let's call to a method something send message. So pass this inside of quotes. After this, don't forget to add the parentheses. Perfect. So guys, this calls send message method when the button is clicked. Alright, so as you guys can see here, we are getting this error. Why is that? Because this method is still not defined. So let's define this send message method inside the postlist component class. So go to the postlist component TS file. Inside the class scope, create the send message method. So the method name is send message. After this, parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this method, we want to emit the child message to the event emitter. Before that, let's make sure the button click event works. So add a console log inside this method, console.log, and pass this message button clicked. Don't forget to add this inside quotes. Right, so save this and go to the browser, click the button, and as you guys can see here, this button clicked log printed inside the browser console. So which means this click event is working as we expected. So alright, now let's get into the real business. Now let's see how to send this message to the parent component when click the send message button. So for this, we need to create a new event emitter with the output decorator. So for that, first we have to import output and event emitter into the postlist component from the Angular core. So put these imports inside the same import statement. So after this and this, first let's add the event emitter. So carefully follow these capital simple letters. So after this comma and next the output decorator. So this O is capital. Now next add the output decorator inside the class scope. So how do we add the output decorator? The same as the input decorator. So first add the @ symbol and the decorator name output. This O must be capital. So after this, name it something like message event and assign it to a new event emitter. So don't forget to add the parentheses after this event emitter. So guys, this event emitter will handle the event we want to emit. Okay. So guys, we have created the event emitter. Now we want to emit this message when this button is clicked. So let's see this in action. Guys, let's emit the message to the event emitter. So inside the send message method, because we are calling this method when we click event occur, right? So inside this method, add this dot message event, which is this output variable. After this dot and emit inside the parentheses, pass the message that we want to emit to this output variable, which is this parent message. So pass this inside this parentheses. So this dot parent message. That's it. So guys, this will emit the parent message into this output variable every time the button is clicked. Alright, so next we need to capture this event in the parent component. So how do we do that? So like the input method, we have to use this child component selector to capture the data that's sending from the child component. So open the app component HTML file and find the selector for the post list component. So inside this selector, bind the message event to a method in the parent component. So inside this selector, add this open and close brackets. Inside this, pass the output variable, which is this message event. After this, bind this to a method something called receive message, and after this add the parenthesis, and the value of this event will assign to the event property. So pass that to this as a parameter. So inside this add $event. So guys, what's happening here? Guys, in here we are using the event binding approach to listen for the message event output variable that we defined in our child component. When this event is emitted, it will trigger the receive message method in our parent component, passing along whatever the data was emitted when this event is triggered as this $event parameter variable. Now you might be wondering, where is this receive message method? We haven't created it yet, so that's why we are getting this compile error. So let's go ahead and implement this method in our parent component. So go to the app component is file, and inside the class scope create the receive message method. So the method name is receive message. After this, the parentheses and the method scope. So next, this method will take a parameter. So define that here. The parameter variable name something message and set this type as string. Now inside the method, let's log the parameter variable to see what we are getting. So add this console.log, and inside parentheses pass this parameter variable, which is this message. Now save this and go to the browser. Click this button again, and as you guys can see here, this printed the message from the child component in the browser console. Awesome, right? So this shows that we successfully passed the data from the child component to the parent component using the output decorator event emitter. So guys, this is not done yet. So in order to display this message in the parent components template, first create a variable in the parent component class. So let's call it message from child. So, and its type will be string. After this, assign an empty value. Now inside the receive message method, assign the event parameter to this variable. This dot message from child assign message, which is this parameter variable. So guys, finally use the string interpolation to display this message in the parent component template. So open the app component HTML file, and inside this create a paragraph tag. Inside this string interpolation, use two curly brackets. Now pass the message from child variable between these string interpolation. Now save everything and go to the browser. Now when you click the button, you should see the message from the child component displayed in the parent component. Beautiful, right? So guys, this is how we pass data from a child component to a parent component using the output decorator and the event emitter. Alright, so guys, in the previous lecture, we learned how to deal with the data flow child to the parent component. For this, we use two approaches, view child and the output event approach. So let's look at how these decorators are working and what are the difference between these two approaches. So first, let's look at the first approach, which is the view child decorator. So guys, with this we are directly looking inside of the child component and will access the data what we need. Think this is like something supermarket. In supermarket, they let us in without any problem with full access, and we can go around and we can take whatever the things we need, right? This is also same like this. So with the view child, we are giving the full access of the child component to the parent component. So parent component can get into the child component, access all the data stored inside of this child component. So guys, but we have a problem here. Think we need to buy just a toilet paper and we are going to the supermarket. We have to find the toilet paper section and we have to check out. So if the supermarket is a small one with few items, then we can easily find the item and check out. But think about a big supermarket chain. Inside of that, we can see so many items, categories, and thousands of varieties, and also it is too big, right? So we have to go around and around to find the single toilet paper, and we have to wait in the billing big queues just to buy a single toilet paper. It will very time consuming and it can easily make us exhausted, right? So the same thing can apply to the view child approach. So with the view child, we are accessing the child component. If the component is with just one or two variables, in that case, we can simply access the data. But think if the child component has so many variables and we want to access one of them using view child. So in this case, view child has to look through all of the variables and access the variables that we need and has to bring out back to the parent component. So this is something sound like a heavy task. So this can be slow down our application. To get just single variable, we are accessing hundreds of variables. It's not too good, right? So as a solution for this, we have the output decorator and the event emitter approach. So with this, we are just sending only the required data to the parent component from the child component, rather giving full access to the child component. If we take the same example scenario to buy a toilet paper roll, rather going to a big supermarket, we can simply go to a small grocery shop and we can ask the shop owner what we need and they will provide us. So in a small grocery shop, we don't have the full access like big supermarket. We will ask what we need from the shop owner or any shop employee. Then they are the one access the shop inventory and bring us what we asked, right? So the same thing can apply to the output event emitter approach as well. In here, we will not get access to the child component. The event emitter is the one sending our required data to the parent component. So with the output decorator, we are creating the bridge between child to parent component, and this event emitter will bring the required data to the parent component. Guys, I just took the supermarket concept for this to explain this you guys to understand this better. But this is not like a supermarket concept. There is more. So just remember how these two approaches works. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, now hope you guys have a clear picture about how to share a data between parent component to the child component and vice versa. So now in this lecture, let's look at another approach to sharing data from parent to child component, which is using the ng content or the content projection approach in Angular. So what the heck is this ng content? Well, think of it as a special window in our component that allow us to pass a piece of data from a parent component directly into child component. Wait, let's break it down a bit more. You guys know already how we have been passing data to child components using input decorator, right? So the ng content also same like that. But with this, we can send an entire block of HTML and we can place it exactly where we want in the child component view. So let's see this in action. Let's think about a real world example. Imagine we are creating a card component for our application. Sometimes we want the card to display a user profile, sometimes a product, and sometimes a blog article or something. So in this case, instead of creating 3 separate card components, we can create one flexible card component using the ng content. So let's dive in. So guys, for this, let's create another new component. How do we do that? Yes, of course, you guys already know about it, right? So we can generate a component using the Angular CLI. So go to the VS Code integrated terminal and add this command ng generate component and give it a name something card. So in order to execute this command, hit enter. Perfect. Now we have the component. Next, let's load this inside the browser. So how do we do that? Very simple. In order to load this component inside the browser view, we have to add the component selector inside the app component. So this component selector is, we can find this inside the component.ts file, right? So this new card component selector is this app-card. So add this inside the app component HTML file as a custom HTML tag. Now, as you guys can see here, we are getting this compile error. Why is that? So of course, this is a standalone component. So in order to prevent this error, we have to import this component to this app component. So inside the app component TS file, inside this imports array, add the cards component. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got this text which is coming from the card component. Alright, so guys, next let's work on the ng content. Guys, now I want to use this card component to load the user profile inside the browser. So for this, first we have to add the ng content tags inside the card component. So inside the card component HTML file, add this ng-content custom HTML tags, opening and closing HTML tags. That's it. Now inside the app component, between these card component selectors, we can pass the data that we want to render inside the card component. So for now, let's pass a simple p tag with the text something. This is loaded using ng content. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, inside this we can see text card is working. This is coming from the card component, but down here we got this text loaded using ng content. This is coming from the app component and it's rendered inside the card component. So guys, this is how we pass template data from parent component to the child component. So this ng content will render whatever the data we send between the component selector from the parent component. Alright guys, in the previous I told that I want to use the same card component to show two different values. So in this app component, I want to load the user details and also I want to load the post details from the post list component. So how do we do that? So first inside this, let's load the user details. Very simple. Between these card component selector, pass the values that we want to load. So we load the user details. So the set the username inside of h2 tags, open and close h2 tags, and inside that set a username something John Doe. Down here set the user join date, put this inside of p tags, set a dummy date. Next let's pass the user description something dummy paragraph text. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. We can see the user details. Now think I want to load the post details in another card. So for this, we'll add the card component inside the post list component. So go to the post list component HTML file and add the card component selector. So guys, now this post component is the parent component of this card component. So now from here we can send whatever the data that we want to load inside the card component. So from here I want to send post details unlike the previous user details. So pass the data between these component selector tags. Inside of h2 tags, pass the blog title, something, blog post title 1. Next, pass the blog publish date inside of p tags. Next, pass the blog summary, something, dummy text. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this time we got two cards. This user card loaded from the app component and this post card loaded from the post list component. So for this two layout, we used the same single card component. So this is one of the reusable component example using the content projection in Angular. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so guys, now let's look at another feature coming with this content projection, which is the multi-slot content projection. So guys, previously we simply passed these all data into this one ng content. So think if this card layout has header, a body, something, footer or the action area. So in the header area, I want to place the username. In the body area, I want to place the user details. In the action area or the footer, I want to place an action button. So how do we do that? For this, we can use the multi-slot content projection approach in Angular, right? So let's see this in action. So go to the card component HTML file. Inside this, now remove these ng content tags. Now think we have a card div. Inside that, we have these three sections. One for the card header. For this, let's create heading tags. Inside that, let's add a ng content tag. Now I want to load the header text inside this. Let's load a username inside this. So we'll pass this username from the app component. So inside the card selector, let's remove the previous tags. And now let's just pass only the username, right? So let's add the username inside of span tags. So add the span tags. So open and close span tags, and between these, let's add a dummy username, something, username. Now save this and go to the browser. We can see the username here. If you look at the code inside the browser, inside this card component, we got this header section. Inside this, we can see the username loaded inside the ng content. Perfect. So now what I want to do is I want to add the user details inside of the card body. So for this we have to modify the card component. So go to the card component HTML file and add this. After this header, add a div tags. So guys, we'll use the div tags for the card body. Now again, inside this, add another ng content tags. So here we have project the user details. That's it. So save this and go to the app component HTML file, and inside this now let's pass the user's name. So for this, let's create a h1 tags, and the username is John Doe. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Now inside the card, we got this view. But guys, if you look at the browser codes, in here, this time this ng content projected the contents inside this body div, not inside the header tags. So what's going on here? Can you guys guess? Guys, the problem here is, now inside this card component, we have added these two ng content tags. So when we have more than one ng content tags, this will automatically load the data inside the last ng content tag. So what if I add another ng content down here? Now this time the content is projected inside this outside ng content. So guys, once again, so when we have more than one ng content tags, this will automatically load the data inside the last ng content tag. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so in order to prevent this, we can give a unique identifier to each ng content tags, and using that identifier we can simply project the content that we want to load inside the particular section. For example, we want to load only the username inside the header and user details inside the card body. Let's see this in action. So for this, simply add a property name for this ng content tags. So inside of square brackets, we'll name this ng content as header. Next, we have to assign this to a special type of attribute called select. So pass this here, and at last don't forget to put this inside of quotes. Next, we'll name the second ng content as body. So first the attribute select, after this equal sign, and add this inside of square brackets body. So now we have given the unique identifiers for these. So now save this and go to the app component.html file. Now this time let's load this username inside the header area. For this, guys, we gave the identifier as header. So simply pass that inside this span text. Next, we'll load this inside the body area. So add the identifier inside this user's name h1 tags. That's it. Simple, right? So now save this and go to the browser. We got the data here. If you look at the browser elements, this time the username loaded inside the header area and the user's name John Doe loaded inside the body div. If you look further down here, in the last ng content, we got nothing. Why is that? This time we are directly binding the content to each section ng content using the unique identifier, right? Perfect. So guys, before the end of this lecture, I want to add an action button inside the footer area. So how do we add that? Very simple. Again, inside the card component, create a footer section, and inside that add the ng content tags. Now in order to load the content inside this, we have to give it a name, something, footer. So do this using the select attribute, same like previous. Now next, from the parent component, send the data. So I want to set an action button for this. So create a button after this and set the button name as something, view profile. Now in order to load this inside the footer, we have to pass the identifier name, which is footer. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Inside this, we got the button. If you look at the code now, so inside this we can see the button is loaded inside the footer area. So guys, this is how we deal with multi-slot content projection in Angular. So hope you guys got the idea. Hey guys, welcome to this new section where we're going to dive into really important concept in Angular, lifecycle hooks. So what are lifecycle hooks and why do we need to know about them? So let's dive in. Alright, so first thing first, what exactly are lifecycle hooks? Well, lifecycle hooks are special method provided by Angular that allow us to tap into different stages of a component's lifecycle, from the moment a component is created to the moment it is destroyed. Angular provides hooks that let us run custom logics at specific times. Think of a component's life cycle like a human life. We have different stages: birth, growing up, adulthood, and finally the end of the life. Similarly, a component goes through different stages from creation to destruction, and Angular gives us hooks to perform actions at each stage. Now you might be wondering, why do we need these hooks? For guys, sometimes we need to set up some data or state as soon as the component is created. So sometimes we might need to perform actions when data bound properties changes. So sometimes we have to clean up the resources or subscription to avoid memory leaks when the component is destroyed. So each of these scenarios, we have to use these lifecycle hooks. Don't worry about this. If you guys don't get it, you guys will get used to these in next few lectures. Alright, so now let's get an overview of the different lifecycle hooks available in Angular. So almost we have 8 different lifecycle hooks available in Angular components. The first one is the ng on init. So guys, this called once after the component is initialized. So the second one is ng on changes. So this called every time an input property changes. Next we have the ng do check. This will called during every change detection run. So next the ng after content init lifecycle hook. So this will called once after the component's content has been initialized. Next we have the ng after content checked. So this will called after every check of the component's content. Next we have the ng after view init. So this will called once after the component's view has been initialized. Next we have the ng after view checked. So guys, this will called after every check of the component's view. And last we have the ng on destroy. So this lifecycle hook will called just before the component is destroyed. So guys, don't worry if this seems like a lot. We are going to go through each one of these lifecycle hooks step by step with examples. So to really understand lifecycle hooks, we need to see them in action. So in next few lectures, we'll create a simple Angular component and implement these hooks one by one. So we'll log messages to the console so we can see exactly when each hook is called. Alright, so guys, that's a brief introduction to lifecycle hooks in Angular. Understanding and using these hooks effectively is crucial for building robust and maintainable application. So in the next lectures, we'll dive deep into each lifecycle hook, see how it works and how we can use it in our components. Alright, before we dive into the lifecycle hooks, let's look at another feature in the component, which is loading and destroying components inside the browser view programmatically. So let's see this in action. As we learned in previous lectures, in order to load a component inside of the browser view, we have to add the component selector inside of the main root component, in our case inside this app component. So for this, we directly use the template file. Think if any case, if we want to load a component inside the view, when we click a button or something, or in any case if we want to render a component conditionally, how do we do that? For this we have two approaches in Angular. So the first one is the ng component outlet directive. So this is a custom directive which renders components inside the browser dynamically. So let's see this and we'll move on to the next one. So inside the app component.html file, I want to load the post list component inside of a div. So inside the app component.html file, create a div. Now inside this, let's load the component programmatically. For this, we'll use the component outlet directive, right? So inside this div, add the directive. In Angular, all the directives starts with the asterisk symbol, right? So add that here. After this, the directive name is ng component outlet. Carefully follow this capital simple letters. Now from here, let's call a method something load component. So after this, add the parentheses. So in order to work with this, we have to do two things. First, we have to add the import statement for this directive. So after that, we have to create this method. Still, this method is not created inside the component ts file. So back to the app component ts file. First, let's add the import. So inside the import decorator, add this. So the directive name is ng component outlet. So select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. So guys, this is coming with the Angular command module. So next, let's create the method. So down here, the method name is load component. So after this, parentheses and the method scope. Now from inside this method, simply return the component that we want to render inside the browser. So add the return keyword. After this, the component is this post list component. So guys, in order to work this, we have to import this to this app component. We already did this in a previous lecture. So again, we don't need to import that. So that's it. Now save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, inside the browser, we can see the post list components view. This is loaded using the ng component outlet. So guys, this is how we load a component inside of the view programmatically using the ng component outlet directive. Alright, now let's quickly look at the second approach of this loading a component inside the view programmatically. So for this, we'll use a separate inbuilt Angular API, view content ref. So let's see this in action. Now this time I want to render the post list component view inside the browser when a user clicks a button. So for this, first thing first, let's create a button inside the app component.ts file. Inside this, down here, create a button tags and the button text will be create component. Next, attach a click event binding for this. How do we do that? Very simple, just add the click event inside the brackets. After this, the method. So let's call the same previous method for this as well. So the method name is load component. After this, add the parentheses. So now we don't need the previous approach. So I'll comment this. Now go to the app component.ts file. First thing first, we have to inject this view container ref to this component. So create a constructor method. Inside this parentheses, we have to add the injection. So private, create a variable something view container. After this, colon, and our module name is view container ref. So select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. Guys, don't worry about this injection. We will learn about this in detail in the Angular services section. For now, just simply follow these steps. That's it. So now inside the load component method, which is we are calling when the load component button is pressed with this click event, right? So now inside this, let's add the code to render the post list component inside the browser view. So inside this, add this dot view container, which is this injected dependency view container ref, right? After this dot create component and the parentheses. So this method requires the component that we want to render as the parameter. So pass that inside this parentheses. So the parameter is the post list component. That's it. So simply guys, this will render this component inside the view when we click the load component button. Alright, so save this and go to the browser. Now click on this button. As you guys can see here, this loaded the post list component inside the browser. Awesome, right? So guys, before the end of this lecture, let's see how to remove or destroy a component from the view using the same approach. So for this, also create a button inside the app component HTML file. So the button text is something remove component. Next, add the click event. From this, let's call a method something remove component. So now go to the app component file and create the remove component method. So now inside this, let's add the code to remove the component from the view. So for this also, we will use the same view container ref. So inside this dot view container, which is the injected container ref, right? So after this, to remove a component from the view, we have to call the remove method. So after this dot remove and add the parentheses. So guys, simply this will remove the component that attach to this view container. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Click on this button. This will render the post list component inside the view. Now click on the remove component. As you guys can see here, this removed the post list component from the view. Cool, right? So guys, this is how we programmatically render and remove components from the view. Alright guys, in this section we are going to talk about the first lifecycle hook in Angular, which is ng on changes. So what is this ng on changes and why do we use it? So guys, the ng on changes is the first lifecycle hook that Angular calls when the component is rendered. It's called whenever the data bound input properties change. This means that whenever the value of an input property in your component changes, Angular will call ng on changes method. So think of it like this. Imagine you are updating a profile on a social media site. Every time you change your profile picture or update your bio, the changes get saved and displayed inside the browser view. Similarly, ng on changes detects the changes in input properties and allow us to react to those changes immediately. So let's see how we can use this in our code. So guys, for this first let's create a simple component. We'll call it profile component. So how do we create a new component? Guys, simply go to the VS Code integrated terminal and run this command ng gc and name it profile component. Now what I want to do is I want to share the username from the app component to this new profile component. So how do we do that? For this guys, first thing first, we need a connection. So parent child. In order to do that, we have to add our new profile component inside the app component. So go to the app component HTML file and add this profile component selector, which is this app-profile. So now save this and go to the browser. This loaded the text from the profile component. Awesome. Now next, I want to define the onChanges lifecycle hook inside the profile component. So how do we do that? Very simple. So first thing first, we have to add the import statement. Only for this lecture, I will add the import statement manually. From next lecture onwards, we can do this automatically. So for this, we can use the auto import that coming with the VS Code integrated feature, right? So inside the profile component ES file, add this top here. So guys, this onChanges lifecycle hook also coming with the Angular core package. So we don't need to write a new import statement. For this, we can simply add this inside the same component import. So after this, add a comma and add our hook name onChanges. So guys, this is not onChange, it's called onChanges. So carefully follow this naming convention. Next, in order to use this hook, we have to implement to this component class. So after this component class name, add the keyword implements. After this, add our lifecycle hook onChanges. Pass it same like the import we add. Carefully follow the capital simple letters, otherwise you will get unnecessary errors. So guys, what is this implement? With this, we are changing this component class shape to use this lifecycle hook, right? So now as you guys can see here, we are getting this error saying there is missing this ng onChanges property in this onChanges lifecycle hook. So in order to use this, we need this method ng onChanges declared inside this component. So down here inside the class scope, let's define the method. The method name is ng onChanges. So carefully follow these capital simple letters. Next, the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this method, we can add the code to run when this onChanges lifecycle hook triggered. So for now, just let's log a message so we can actually see when this method will trigger. So inside this, add the console.log. Inside this, set the message something onChanges triggered. Now save this and go to the browser. Now inside the browser console, we got nothing here. Why is that? Can you guys guess? Guys, as I said, in order to trigger this ng onChanges hook, there must be something that should change on an input property. Now in our case, inside of this profile component, still we don't have any input properties. So that's why this method is not triggered. Alright, so now let's try to trigger this onChanges method. So now I want to send the username from the app component or the parent component to this child component. So how do we do that? For this we can use the input decorator, right? So let's do this. So guys, first thing first, we need the variable to store the username. So go to the app component is file and create a new variable, something username. So set this type as string and set a default value something John Doe. Next, let's send this username to the profile or the child component. How do we do that? We simply bind that to this component selector. So inside this, add a square brackets and add a new input variable named something p username. So this p stands for parent, right? So next, assign this to the username variable that we define inside this app component. Now we are getting this compile error because still we are not declared this input variable inside the profile component. So go to the profile component and create this variable. Guys, this must be an input variable. So add the input decorator. So how do we add that? We'll define a decorator using the @ symbol, right? So add @ symbol after this input. So this I is capital. After this, add the parentheses. Now next, add the variable name that we added inside the profile component selector, which is this p username. So add that here. After this, add the variable type as string. Perfect. So guys, before we move on, let's render this input variable inside the browser. So inside the profile component HTML file, add the string interpolation and render this p username inside this. Awesome. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we got the username inside the browser. Now let's look at inside the browser console. As you guys can see here, this time inside the console we got this ng on changes triggered message, which means this time the ng on changes method triggered somehow. Can you guys guess what happened here? So guys, nothing much here. Now we have an input property inside our profile component. So this onChanges hook will automatically trigger when this input property changed. So at the initial stage of this component, we declared this input variable. Once this loaded, we sent the username value to this component via binding to this input variable from the parent component. So in that case, this input variable value changes. So if the input variable value changes, this ng on changes hook will trigger. So that's how we got this log printed inside the browser view. Wait, I'll show you another example. Let's change this username value dynamically when clicking a button. So for this, first thing first, create this button inside the component HTML file. Set the button text something, change username. Now from this button, let's call a method in click event. So bind the click event. Inside this, call a method something, change user. After this, don't forget to add the parentheses. Now go to the app component is file and create the change user method. So now inside this method, change the username value to something, John Smith. Now save this all and go to the browser. Inside the console, we can see the initial onChanges hooks log. Now click on this button, change user. As you guys can see here, when I click the button, this changes the username value to John Smith. And inside the browser console, again we can see the second onChanges log, which means for the second time also the ng onChanges hook triggered. How this happened? Because guys, this time again we are changing the input value of the profile component. So when we change this username inside the app component, the Angular change detection mechanism will detect this change and automatically send the new value to the child component's input variable. So that's how we can see the updated username variable loaded inside the browser. So when this input username value changed, ngOnChanges hook will detect this input property changes and triggered this ngOnChanges lifecycle hook. So that's how we got this log printed inside the browser view for the second time as well. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so once again, the ngOnChanges is a powerful lifecycle hook that let us react to changes in input properties. Whenever an input property changes, Angular calls ngOnChanges, allowing us to handle the change and update our component accordingly. So this is especially useful for handling dynamic data and keeping our components in sync with changes. I think that's it for ngOnChanges lifecycle hook. So guys, keep practicing using examples to get a better understanding of how it works. So in the next section, we'll cover the ngOnInit lifecycle hook and see how it works with the Angular components. So let's move on to the next lecture. Alright guys, in this section we are going to dive into another super important lifecycle hook in Angular, which is ngOnInit. So what is ngOnInit all about and why do we need it to know it? So first thing first, what exactly is ngOnInit? Well, ngOnInit is a lifecycle hook that Angular calls after the component has been initialized. It's like the ready to go signal for your component. Think of it like this. When you are setting up for a party, you first get all your decorations and food ready. So that's like the components being created. But the party doesn't really start until everyone's arrived and you say, let's begin. So that let's begin moment is what ngOnInit is for your component. Now you might be wondering, why do we need ngOnInit? So here is why. So guys, it's the perfect place to initialize your component's data. So if you need to fetch data from a server when your components loads, ngOnInit is where you typically do that. So any complex setup that shouldn't be in the constructor can go here. Remember, ngOnInit is called only once in the component's lifecycle right after the component has been initialized. Alright, so let's see how we can use ngOnInit in our code. For this guys, we'll use our profile component from the previous example. First, in order to work with this hook, we need to import onInit from Angular core. So go to the profile.component.ts file and add the import inside this same Angular core import. So after this, add a comma and the hook name is onInit. So guys, carefully follow these capital simple letters. This O and I must be uppercase letters. Perfect. Now next, so guys, in order to use this hook, we need to implement onInit lifecycle hook to our component class, right? So after this first onChanges hook, simply add a comma and add our current hook onInit. Now we are getting this compile error saying that the ngOnInit method is missing. So in order to work with this, we need to add this ngOnInit method inside this component class, right? So let's do this. Down here, add the method. So the method name is ngOnInit. Once again, carefully follow the naming convention. Now after this, the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this hook, let's add a console log. So console.log and set the log message something ngOnInit hook triggered. That's it. Now save this all and go to the browser. Open the browser console and you should see this message ngOnInit triggered. So guys, unlike the previous hook, we don't need any input values or anything. This ngOnInit will automatically triggers when the component initialized. So one more thing, now this component is fully initialized. That's why we are seeing this component view inside the browser, right? As I said previously, after the component fully initialized, we cannot trigger this ngOnInit method again. Wait, now if I click this change username button, this will change the username value and this triggered the onChanges hook for the second time. However, guys, this does not trigger the ngOnInit. So what I am trying to explain is that this ngOnInit will only trigger once. So after that, this onInit hook will not trigger again, no matter what changes happen inside the component. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so ngOnInit is a crucial lifecycle hook in Angular. It's called once the component is initialized and its binding are resolved, making it the perfect place for initialization logic, especially when you need access to input properties or need to make API calls. So guys, keep this in your mind. Use the ngOnInit for complex initialization, especially those involving input properties or data fetching. The ngOnInit is called only once per component's lifecycle. Hope you guys got the idea. I think that's it for ngOnInit. So practice this in your components to get a better feel for how it works. So in the next section, we'll cover another important lifecycle hook, ngDoCheck. So see you there. Alright, so guys, in the previous lecture, we looked at the ngOnInit lifecycle hook. So before we move on to the next hook, let's look at the constructor method in this component. So guys, this constructor is not something coming with the Angular or it's not fall under lifecycle hooks. And by default, constructor method is coming with the TypeScript. However, in order to understand the ngOnInit lifecycle, we have to understand this constructor method's behavior as well. So let's dive in. The first question is, what is a constructor? Well, a constructor is a special method in a class that gets triggered automatically when an instance of the class is created. In Angular terms, it's the first method that's called when a component is initiated. Think of it like the birth of a component. Just like when a baby is born, there are certain things that happen immediately inside the baby's body, right? So that's what the constructor is for in the life of a component. Alright, so let's see how we can use a constructor in our code. We'll use our profile component from previous examples. So let's create the constructor method. So for this guys, we don't need to add any imports, just simply create the method. So inside this, before this ngOnInit, add this constructor. After this, add the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, let's log a message. So then we can simply check when this constructor method will trigger. So add this console.log and add the message something, constructor method triggered. That's it. Now save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, inside the browser console, we can see this message constructor method triggered. So guys, as I said, this constructor method will trigger when this component class new instance created. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, now you guys might be thinking, wait a minute, couldn't we just do everything in the constructor instead of using ngOnInit lifecycle hook? And these both triggered almost at the same time, right? Well, it's not exactly like that. So let's see why. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log this input variable in this constructor method and also inside the ngOnInit hook. So let's do this. Inside the constructor method, after this first log, add another log and add the input variable p username inside this parentheses. This dot p username. Now copy and paste this same log inside the ngOnInit as well. That's it. So now save this and refresh your browser. Look at the console logs. Can you spot the difference? So guys, inside the browser console, you will see that
in the constructor, the username is undefined, but in ng-on-init, it has a value. Can you guys tell me what is the problem here? Guys, this is because input properties aren't set until after the constructor has run, but they are available by the time ng-on-init runs. Wait, let's make it more simple. Alright, so guys, the constructor method isn't something that coming with the Angular framework. This is by default coming with the TypeScript class. In other words, this is something a JavaScript class feature. So when this run, the TypeScript class or our component class will create an instance of that class inside the memory or in our computer RAM. Simply this will allocate a memory space for this. After that, this will allocate spaces for variables and other methods that are included inside this class. So if take our profile component, when we run this, first this profile component class will allocate a memory space for this or create an instance of this component class inside our PC RAM. After that, the constructor method will trigger immediate after this allocation of the memory space. At this time, the component class is empty. There is nothing inside this. So that's why we are getting this undefined, because there is no pusername input variable value to print inside the browser console. So that's why we are getting the undefined at this constructor stage. So hope you guys got the idea. Next, let's look at our second scenario. So guys, the ng-on-init hook will trigger after the component fully initialized or fully loaded all its variables and methods inside the memory. So in this case, when trigger this ng-on-init hook, this input pusername is already initialized and ready to use. So that's how we get the input variable value printed inside the browser console. So this is what I was trying to tell you guys. And this is the main difference between this ng-on-init lifecycle hook and the constructor method. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright. So guys, mostly we use the constructor for dependency injection and simple initialization that don't depend on input properties. So we'll use ng-on-init for more complex initialization, especially those that rely on input properties of fetching data. Okay, so now that we know that constructors are for, so let's talk about some best practices for this constructor method. First, keep it simple. The constructor should be lightweight, so avoid complex logics or heavy computations. Next, use the constructor only for injecting dependencies. Next, avoid async operations. Don't make HTTP calls or start complex async operations inside the constructor method. And at last, don't access the DOM. The view isn't ready in the constructor, so don't try to access DOM elements inside this constructor. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so that's it for the constructor. So guys, practice using them in your components to get a better feel for how they work. So in the next, we'll cover another important concepts in Angular. Alright, so let's move on to the next lesson. Alright guys, let's move on to our next lifecycle hook in Angular, ng-do-check. So what's ng-do-check all about and why do we need to know it? So let's begin. Alright guys, so first thing first, what exactly is ng-do-check? Well, ng-do-check is a lifecycle hook that Angular calls during every change detection run. It's like a vigilant guard, constantly checking for changes in your component. Think of it like this. Imagine you are watching a busy street from your window. Every time a car passes by, even if it is the same car, you look out to see what's happening. That's what ng-do-check does for your component. It checks for changes every time Angular's change detection runs, even if nothing has actually changed. Now you might be wondering, why do we need to
use this ng do check lifecycle hook. Here's why. So this has custom change detection approach. So it allow you to implement your own custom change detection. So next, it's useful when Angular's default change detection might miss changes in complex objects or arrays. So next, you can use it to track how often change detections run. But guys, remember, with a greater power comes great responsibility. So the ng do check lifecycle hook can be called very frequently. So we need to be careful not to put heavy operations in here. Alright, so let's see how we can use ng do check in our code. We'll use our same profile component for this as well. So first we need to import do check from Angular core, same like previous. So guys, now we don't need to add the import manually. We'll do this using the autocomplete way. So just implement this do check lifecycle hook in our component class. So we already used this implement for the previous hooks. So just pass our new hook interface after this. So add a comma and the hook name is do check. Carefully follow these simple capital letters. Now guys, select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. Perfect. Now in order to work with this do check hook, we have to add the ng do check method inside this class. So down here, create an ng do check method. Don't forget to add the parentheses and the method scope. Next, inside this, let's add a log, console.log, and set the log as something ng do check triggers. That's it. Now save this and go to the browser, open your browser console, and you might be surprising by how many times you see ng do check triggered logged inside this browser console. So here we see that this do check log printed twice. So at the initial stage of this component, we are passing the username value from the parent component. So by default, we added this input property value as an empty string. So when we receiving the input value from the parent, so this will change. So in this case, Angular change detection will get active and update our component's value and the browser view. So this change detection will trigger the ng do check method as well. So that's how we got the second ng do check triggered log message inside the browser console. So how this first do check printed here? So this printed on the initial stage of components declared. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now let's click on this update user button. This time also this triggered the ng do check. So guys, ng do check is a powerful lifecycle hook that allows us to implement custom change detection logics. It's called during every change detection run, enabling you to inspect and react to changes in your component state. This is especially useful when the default Angular change detection doesn't cover your specific needs. Alright, so guys, that's it for the ng do check lifecycle hook. So practice using it to get a better understanding of how it works. So in the next section, we'll cover the ng after content init hook and see how it helps with project content. Alright, before we move on to the next lifecycle hook, some of you guys might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't this ng do check hook similar to ng on changes? Well, it's not exactly similar to the ng on changes hook. The ng do check hook is a part of Angular's change detection mechanism, unlike ng on changes, which only gets called when input properties change. Ng do check is called during every change detection run. This allows you to implement your own change detection logic and catch changes that ng on changes might miss. So let's set up an example to see how ng do check works compared to the ng on changes. For this guys, we'll set up a variable inside the profile component, something. We'll name it counter, set the variable type as number and set a default value 0. Now let's render this inside the browser view. How do we do that? Yes, of course, for this we will use this string interpolation. So inside the profile component HTML file and add this, let's put this inside of an h1 tags. So create h1 tag and inside this add the string interpolation. Inside this string interpolation pass the counter variable. Now save this and go to the browser. We can see this counter value. Now let's add a simple logic to increment this counter value when clicking a button. So go to the profile HTML file and create a button tags and set a button text something increment counter. Next, from this button, let's call a method. So for this, bind a click event and call a method from this. So set the method name as something increment counter. After this, don't forget to add the parentheses. Now inside the profile component TS file, create this method. The method name is increment counter. Add the parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, let's increment the counter value. For this, we can use the increment operator, right? So inside this method, this dot counter. After this, add the increment operator, double plus signs. So guys, this will simply increase the current value of this counter value by 1. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Now we can see these values inside the browser. So guys, this username is coming from the parent component and this counter value is declared inside the profile component. So inside the browser console, we got these ng changes and do check methods, triggers, logs. So now what I want to do is, now just click on the change username button. Username changed, right? Inside the browser console, wait, let's clear the console so you guys can see this clearly. Now our console is empty. Again, click on the change user button. Inside the console, we got this ng on changes triggered and also we got the ng do check triggered log, which means when we updating these input property value, this triggered the both lifecycle hooks. But if I click on this counter button, as you guys can see here, every time I click the counter, this triggered only the ng do check lifecycle hook, not the on changes hook. So the lesson here is ng on changes hook is only called when the input property reference changes, but the ng do check hook is called during every change detection that happens inside our component. So this is the main difference between the ng on changes and the ng do check hook. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so in summary, the ng do check hook is a powerful but tricky lifecycle hook in Angular. It's called during every change detection run, giving you fine-grained control over detecting changes in your component. But keep this, remember, use ng do check for custom change detection logics. It's called very frequently, so keep the logic inside this lightweight. It can catch changes that ng on changes might miss, especially in complex objects. So, and last but not least, be mindful of performance implications when using this ng do check. Awesome. I think that's it for the ng do check lifecycle hook. So once again, practice it's your own, but remember to use it with caution. So in the next section, we'll cover another important lifecycle hook in Angular. So let's move on. Alright guys, now that we have covered the earlier lifecycle hooks, let's dive into the next one, ng after content init. So this is a really interesting one, especially when you start working with the content projection in Angular. So first thing first, what exactly is this ng after content init? Well, this lifecycle hook is called once after Angular has fully initialized all content projected into the component. So in simple terms, If your component is using something like ng content tags, so ng after content init is triggered once that projected content has been inserted into the components view, right? So now let's get into an example so you can see how this works in action. For this guys, we'll use the same profile component as previous. So first thing first, for this we need to set up the content projection to this component. So inside the profile component, let's set up the content projection. Wait, before that we'll reset this component so we can simply understand this better way. Alright, now inside the profile component HTML file, let's add a div, and inside this let's add the ng content tags. So hope you guys remember this. We learned about this in detail, right? So simply we use this to project a content that coming from the parent component. Alright, so now let's simply send something from the parent component. So in our case, we'll use the app component as our parent component. So inside the app component HTML file, inside this profile component selector, simply add a p tag and set a dummy paragraph something like content projected from parent. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, we can see this paragraph that projected from the parent component. Awesome, right? So now let's work with the after content init hook. So inside the profile component, let's implement this hook. So as you guys know, in order to use any of Angular lifecycle hooks, we have to implement that hook interface to our component class. So let's do this. After this, add the implements keyword and add the hook after content init. Select this autocomplete. This will end the import statement. Now in order to work with this, we have to add the ng after content init method. So add that inside this component class. So the method name is ng after content init. So carefully follow these capital simple letters, right? Now after this, add the parentheses and the method scope. Now guys, simply inside this add a log console.log and set a message something after content init triggered. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Inside this we got the content that we projected from the parent component, and if we look at the console, we got this log after content init triggered. So guys, the ng after content init will simply trigger after the content from the parent has been projected and fully initialized inside the browser view. So guys, simply we are projecting this p tag from the parent app component. When this component start initializing, Angular will know there is a content projection in this profile component. So Angular change detection will watch this ng content continuously to capture the content projection. Once this ng content complete the content projection, this will trigger the Angular after content init lifecycle hook. So that's how we got this log printed inside the browser view. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now some of you guys may be wondering, when should I actually use this hook? The answer is, use ng after content init when you need to perform some actions after the content from the parent component has been projected into your component. This is especially useful for scenarios where you need to manipulate or access that content after it's been rendered. Guys, before end of this lecture, remember these key points. So ng after content init is only called once after the content has been projected into the component. Unlike ng on changes, ng after content init doesn't rerun every time the content changes. It only runs once after the content is initialized. And also guys, it's especially useful when you are working with content projection and need to interact with or manipulate that content after it's been inserted into the view. Alright guys, so that's the ng content init lifecycle hook. It's a powerful tool when you need to work with projected content, making it easier to manage complex components interactions. As you build more complex Angular application, you will start to see where this hook can really come in handy. Alright guys, now that we have covered ng after content init, so now it's time to move on to the next lifecycle hook in Angular, ng after content checked. So this hook is all about checking the content that's been projected into a component, and it's give you an extra layer of control over your component's content. So guys, what exactly does ng after content checked? Well, this lifecycle hook is called after every check of the content that has been projected into your component. That means every time Angular runs its change detection cycle, it will call this hook to allow you to inspect and react to any changes in the projected content. So this is something like the ng-do-check hook. This will trigger every time the projected content changed. So let's use the previous same example for this. So inside the profile component is file, let's add the hook. As usual, first thing first, we have to add the implementation. So inside this, after this, add a comma and add the hook after content checked. Select this autocomplete. This will add the import. Now next, let's add the lifecycle method. So the method name is ng after content checked. Carefully follow these capital simple letters. Now after this method, add the parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, as usual, simply log the message after content check triggered. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, this printed the after content checked log. So guys, this triggered after the content projected. Perfect. Alright, so some of you guys might be wondering, why would I need this hook if I already have ng after content init? The key difference here is that while ng after content init is only called once, ng after content check is called every time Angular checks for changes in the projected content. So this makes it ideal for situations where you need to react to changes in content over time, not just at the initial load. Wait, I'll show you an example for this. So inside the app component, we have this username. So we'll now project this username to the profile component. So inside the profile selector, we'll send this to the profile component. So create h1 tags and add the username variable using the string interpolation. That's it. Now save this and go to the browser. Now we got the username projected here. And inside the console, we got the initial content checked log. Now let's change the username by clicking this button. As you guys can see here, the ng after content checked triggered again, but the ng content init is not triggered. So this is the main difference between these ng after content init and this ng after content checked lifecycle hooks. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so keep this in your mind that ng after content check is called after every change detection cycle, allowing you to monitor and respond to the changes in projected content. So it's different from the ng after content init because it run multiple times, not just once. And also guys, use ng after content checked when you need to keep an eye on the content that might change over time and you need to perform some actions whenever that happens. Alright, so that's it for the ng after content checked lifecycle hook. So it gives you a powerful way to track changes in projected content and react accordingly. Whether you are building a complex UI components or just need more control over content projections, understanding when and how to use ng after content checked can really level up your Angular skills. Alright guys, let's quickly dive into the next lifecycle hook in Angular, and this one's really important when you are working with your components view. So I'm talking about ng after view init. So guys, what exactly is this ng after view init lifecycle hook? Well, this lifecycle hook is triggered after Angular has fully initialized the components view and all its child views inside the browser. In simple terms, once all the DOM elements in your component and its children are ready and rendered, ng after view init gets called. So this hook is especially useful when you need to perform operations that depend on your view being fully rendered. For example, if you want to manipulate DOM elements directly or access the properties of child components, this is the place to do it. Alright, so when does this hook actually run? After Angular finishes rendering your components view, ng after view init is fired. This happens after the ng on init hook and after Angular has checked the components view for any changes. So it's important to note that ng after view init only runs once during the components lifecycle. If you update the view later on, ng after view init won't run again. Only the ng after view checked will handle those scenarios. So let's look at an example for this. So guys, let's simply add this hook inside the profile component is file like previous. So first we have to implement this to this component class. So after this, add this. The lifecycle hook interface name is after view init. So carefully follow these capital simple letters. So add this here and select the correct hook from the autocomplete. This will add the hook import. Now in order to work with this, we need to add the ng after view init method. So add that here. The method name is ng after view init. After this, add the parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, simply add a log so we can simply see when this method triggered. Alright, so save this and go to the browser. Now inside the browser console, so we can see this log. So guys, simply this ng after view init will trigger once the component is fully rendered inside the browser view. Wait, so let's render this component programmatically so we can see this clearly. Inside the app component HTML file, let's remove the profile component selector and create a button. Set the button text to load profile. From this button, call a method in the click event. So inside this, call a method something load components. After this, add the parentheses. So guys, we already have this method inside the app component is file. In a previous lecture, we learned how to load component programmatically in detail, right? So I'm not going to write this code again. If any of you miss this, you can go back and learn this again, right? Alright, so guys, now only change this post list component to profile component inside this method. So simply this will render this component inside the browser when clicking the button. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. Now we cannot see the profile component, and also inside the console we cannot see the after view init log as well. Now click on this button. As you guys can see here, this rendered the profile component, and also inside the browser console we can see this after view init triggered log. So if I click this button again, this rendered this component again, and inside the console we got the log again. So guys, this is how this ng after view init works. Simply this will trigger after the component's view is fully initialized. Hope you guys got the idea. Now guys, some of you guys might be wondering, why should I care about this hook? Well, ng after weave init is crucial when you need to interact with your components weave after it's been fully loaded. Let's say you need to focus an input field automatically when the weave loads, or maybe you need to dynamically measure the size of an element in the weave. These are tasks that require the DOM to be fully available, which makes ng after weave init the perfect hook for them. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so guys, that's it for this lifecycle hook. So if we recap this again, the ng after weave init is a powerful tool in your Angular toolkit. Whenever you need to interact with your components weave or access child components once everything is loaded, this is the hook to use. Remember, it only runs once. So if you need to respond to weave changes afterward, you will want to look into the ng after weave checked hook, which we'll cover in the next lecture. So keep this hook in mind as you build more complex Angular applications, especially when dealing with dynamic content or DOM manipulation. It can save you a lot of headaches by ensuring your code only runs when the weave is fully available. Perfect. Alright guys, in the previous lecture we covered ng after weave init. So let's move on to the next lifecycle hook, ng after weave checked. So this one is crucial when it comes to handling changes in the weave after it's been initialized. So guys, what exactly is ng after weave checked? So this lifecycle hook is called after Angular has checked the components weave and its child weaves for any changes. This means that every time Angular does its change detection for your components weave, ng after weave checked is triggered. So this hook is particularly useful when you need to perform operations that respond to changes in the weave, especially if those changes aren't tied directly to your components data, but instead to the structure or content of the weave itself. So here's the key things to remember. ng after weave checked is called every time Angular checks the weave for changes. So unlike ng after weave init, which only runs once after the weave is initialized. So ng after weave checked can be triggered multiple times during the lifecycle of a component. For example, if you are updating the weave based on a user interaction, or if data binding causes the weave to change, ng after weave checked will be triggered. So let's quickly set up an example so we can understand this clearly. So go to the profile component is file, and first we have to implement this. So after this, class implements add the lifecycle hook, which is the after weave checked. Now select this autocomplete. This will add the import here. Now down here add the ng after weave checked method. Inside this simply add a log something after weave checked triggered. Awesome. Now save this all and go to the browser. Now in order to load the profile component inside the browser, we have to click this button. So click on it. As you guys can see here, this loaded the component. Inside the console, we got the both after weave init and after weave checked hooks triggered message. Now here, click on this increment button. We implement this increment logic in a previous section, right? So click on this increment button. As you guys can see here, when this value increase, this is triggering the ng after weave checked lifecycle hook. So simply guys, this will trigger every time the Angular change detection run. Hope you guys got the idea. So guys, why do we need this if we already have ng after weave init? Well, ng after weave checked is essential when you need to perform action that must occur every time the weave changes, not just once after it's initialized. So this is the main difference between after weave init and after weave checked lifecycle hooks. Before end of this lecture, one important thing to keep in mind with ng after weave checked is that since it runs frequently, it can impact performance if you are doing heavy computations or complex DOM manipulations within this hook. Always ensure that any code inside ng after we've checked is as efficient as possible to avoid slowing down your application. Alright, so that's it for the ng after we've checked hook. So let's move on to the next and our last lifecycle hook, ng on destroy. Alright guys, we have covered a lot of the lifecycle hooks so far, but now it's time to talk about the last Angular lifecycle hook in our list, which is ng on destroy. So guys, what exactly is ng on destroy? This lifecycle hook is the last one that Angular calls before your component is destroyed. It's your component's final chance to clean up any resources, unscribe form observables, detach event handlers, or do any other necessary cleanup task. Think of it as packing up and shutting down. When you are done using a room, you make sure everything is turned off, packed up, and nothing is left behind before you leaving. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so ng on destroy is triggered just before Angular removes the component from the DOM. This typically happens when you navigate away from a view or if you manually destroy a component programmatically. Since it's called right before the component is torn down, it's the perfect place to handle any cleanup tasks that prevent memory leaks and other potential issues. So let's see an example for this. So guys, for this also we'll use the same profile component inside this as usual. First thing first, add the on destroy hook to implements. So after this comma and the hook name is on destroy. Select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. Next, add the ng on destroy method down here. Method name is ng on destroy. So inside this method, simply add a log, and the log message will be something like ng on destroy triggered. That's it. So guys, now what I want to do is I want to close or remove this component from the DOM programmatically. So we did this before, so I'm gonna use that again for this example as well. So guys, inside the app component HTML file, create a button and set the button text as remove profile. Now from this button, let's call this method remove component. Guys, if you can remember, we already declared this in a previous lecture, so hope you guys all remember this. So guys, this will simply remove the rendered component from the DOM. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. First render the profile component using this button. Now click on this remove component. Inside the browser console, we got the ng on destroy triggered message. So guys, once again, simply this ng on destroy lifecycle hook will trigger before this component removed from the DOM. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so ng on destroy is your go-to hook for cleaning up when your component's lifecycle is coming to an end. It's a vital part of managing resources and ensuring your Angular app runs smoothly without hiccups. Always remember to use ng on destroy to tidy up any resources your component might have created. This will help you avoid issues like memory leaks, which can be hard to track down and fix later on. So keep this hook in mind as you build and manage your Angular components, and your app will stay clean and efficient. Alright, so I think that's it for this total lifecycle hook section. Some of you guys may get this, some of you guys may not, but don't worry guys, we will get used to these lifecycle hooks when we start to build our project. We will use some of these lifecycle hooks frequently. Alright, so that's it for this lecture. Let's move on to the next chapter.